In the early 1800s, a French scientist named Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck was the first scientist to propose a model of how life evolves. He became convinced that the fossil record showed that species had changed over time. He proposed an explanation for evolution based on the idea that an individual organism can acquire a new trait during its lifetime, and then pass that trait on to its offspring. For example, Lamarck suggested that when giraffes stretched their necks to reach the leaves of tall trees, they passed the result of this stretching, a longer neck, to the next generation. Lamarck was a highly respected scientist, but he was unable to provide any evidence to support his idea. About 50 years after Lamarck, the British naturalist Charles Darwin published what would become the basis of the modern theory of evolution. As a young adult, Darwin spent 5 years as a naturalist aboard the Beagle, a ship in the British Navy. As he sailed along the coast of South America, he studied rock formations and collected fossils. He also began to compare the new animals he was seeing with ones from his own country. The differences he saw in animals became more obvious when he visited the Galapagos Islands, a chain of volcanic islands about 950 kilometers off the South American coast. On the 18 Galapagos Islands, plants and animals not only differed from those he saw on the mainland, but some differed from island to island. Darwin observed several types of tortoises on the islands. Tortoises with short necks were living in damp areas with abundant plant life that grew close to the ground. Longer-necked tortoises were living in dry areas with cacti. He considered whether the length of their necks made it possible for the tortoises to live in different environments. Darwin also found many different types of birds called finches living on the islands. Some finches were common in the treetops, while others lived in the lower shrubs of a neighboring island. Among the different islands, he noticed a variety of beak shapes and sizes. Some finches had heavy, short beaks useful for pecking trees or seeds, while others had small, thin beaks that could be used for capturing insects. These observations caused Darwin to wonder if the birds had evolved from similar species. After Darwin returned home to England in 1836, he spent several years analyzing the observations and specimens he had collected on his voyage. He struggled to develop an explanation that would account for the amazing diversity of species he saw and for the relationships between them. By 1844, he had developed a hypothesis based in part on an insight from one of his hobbies: breeding pigeons. Darwin knew from personal experience that breeders can produce new varieties of an animal over time. The process breeders use is called artificial selection. For example, breeders produce a new breed of dog by selecting dogs that have certain desired traits and then allowing only those individuals to mate. From the resulting litters, they again selectively breed only the individual dogs with the desired traits. By repeating this process generation after generation, a new breed is produced. Darwin's insight was that a similar process might be going on in nature. He proposed that, through a process he called natural selection, members of a species that are best suited to their environment survive and reproduce at a higher rate than other members of the species. Darwin's personal observations, and the work of another scientist, Alfred Wallace, led Darwin to write about this new concept of evolution. In 1859, after more than 20 years of work, Darwin published his ideas in his book On the Origin of Species. This work led the way for our modern understanding of how new species arise.